which is where your white middle-class people tended to live. And all of this was made possible due to what major road?
Interstate.
The interstate highway was constructed in the 1950s to connect your urban areas to your suburbs, and then it started eventually to connect city to city and coast to coast. Okay, and then border to border, right?
That's
okay,
not why it
all the
was
way
really
across the
great,
country.
though.
Like a big spider web, and you can see a picture of that on page 831. It shows you how interconnected the entire USA became in the 1950s once the interstate system was kind of implemented. Okay? Yeah, so that's a before and after on page 831.
Some of y'all weren't here when I said this, but the real reason that the interstate systems were built is because so we can move troops really fast.
Sure.
And like airstrip. Because
okay.
every, like, was it 3 miles?
Yeah, 3 miles.
1 mile is straight.
Yep. Go to page 838. So we're going to start right there with the baby boom. A lot of your grandparents are probably baby boomers. Maybe some of your parents, depending upon their age. If you were born between the years of 1945 and 1965, you are considered to be a member of the generation of the baby boom. Okay, which means that potentially your dad could have been a soldier fighting for our country. So he would have returned home, met your mother or grandmother, and then they start having children. And some men, of course, didn't get married immediately. Maybe they got married in 1955, but their children are still a member of that generation. Okay, so explain America's increase in birth rate from 1945 through the 1950s. Okay, because that's when the big boom really occurred, like the late 40s and then into the early 50s. So take a look on page 838 and you'll see this line graph. The x-axis, your years by every 2 decades, going all the way back to the American Civil War in 1860. And then the y-axis, the vertical axis, is birth rate per 1,000. Okay? So throughout the late 1800s and the early 1900s, what was going on with America's birth rate? What was happening? It was constantly in decline. Why would it have been in decline?
Diseases.
Okay, what else?
War, like people
That
going to
too.
war.
War,
Mainly.
sickness, illness, Great Depression. Economically, people were like, man, we can't afford to have a kid. They're like being smart about family planning, right? Like, I don't have the money to support another human being. Why would I bring them into this type of life? What else? Any of that would totally be correct. So if you had a question on the AP exam, like, hey, why was America's birth rate in decline from 1860 to 20 or 1940? You could mention all those things: war, economic depression, disease, sickness, etc. Okay, all of that. But then, okay,
Nick.
starting in 1945, right there, right past the 1940 line, what starts to happen? You see this really sharp spike. And that's where we are, right? The baby boom. So you take a look at, you see that on page 838. But then, when does it start to kind of level out?
60s.
Okay, right around really the late 50s, right around 1960. And then what starts to happen again?
Goes down.
Another decline. Okay? So what would have prompted that sharp decline? What do you think?
War. More war.
War?
Doesn't it say improvement in health and
Let's see.
education? Because that's what it
Let's
says.
see. I know.
Improvement in health and education?
I know exactly why it went down. Because stress from like total mass destruction and nuclear warfare.
Well, you got 1960.
Right.
Now we're talking about in America. Hey guys, some of y'all aren't looking at your text. 1960, it starts to drop. What was introduced right around 1960?
Atomic and nuclear warfare.
For women,
Birth control?
birth control was first introduced.
Widespread nuclear
And
tests.
then,
radiation
what
spread,
explains,
by the way.
please be quiet, what explains that sharp increase in birth rate about 1970-ish?
The hippie movement.
Yeah. Okay, the late 1960s, you got the Summer of Love, 1969, Woodstock, all that stuff. You have more people being sexually promiscuous. That happens, duh. What's going to happen? More people become pregnant, right? More women are going to give birth. Okay, so you're going to have a sharp spike, and then it's going to drop again. And then starting about 1980 in the late 70s, here we are again. We see it kind of starting to tick up. Okay. Why might it start to tick up right there at the end in 1980? You start to see it kind of going back up again. What could we possibly think about why in 1980, late 70s, would it start to rise again? And then we don't know what happens according to that graph, right? Because it ends, of course, in 80. Who starts to have children of their own? The baby boomers, right? Now you got all these people, right, that are, you know, being brought up and raised by their parents in the 1950s, and now they're about, you know, late 20s, 30 years old, and they're like, well, maybe we're going to start having kids. Okay? Now what are baby boomers doing today?
Dying.
Retiring. They're retiring. Some of the largest numbers we've ever seen, okay? They're in their 60s and 70s, and they're like, hey, my career's over. I'm hanging it up. So now what are they starting to draw?
Social Security.
Social Security, and this is putting a major strain on the pocketbook of the U.S. government. Okay, and they're like, where are we going to get all this money to pay out to all the baby boomers? So what about you and me when we retire in the next
We're not
40 or
gonna have
50
it.
years?
Damn,
Will there be any money?
No.
Maybe, maybe not.
Unlikely.
That's what I was gonna say.
You know,
So, very unlikely.
something to think about. Something to think about. Okay.
Just slowly save money right now.
Mr. Hubbard.
All right, now here's the next question, okay? And this is what we're going to look at, and then we're going to do some practice multiple choice questions together, okay? Now, I'm going to kind of leave this open-ended for discussion, and I want for you guys to lead the discussion, and I'll just kind of be a part of it, but I want for you to, you know, discuss what you want amongst yourselves, because we're talking about some major culture change in America in the post-World War, right? Consumerism goes up, but then it's way more than consumerism, right? Not only are people buying houses and cars and going to college and buying appliances and record players and all this stuff, going to the movies, but now you're going to start to see family dynamics beginning to change. The rights of people are beginning to change, especially for women and minorities, okay? So how did cultural expectations begin to change in the post-war era? Okay, 1950s and 60s, and then that would continue to evolve even more, even into the next decade of the 70s, okay? So here's what I want you to do. We started looking at this last week, if you were not here. We kind of got into this era a little bit. We briefly talked about Dr. Benjamin Spock, okay? But now if you roll over to 839, you got women, work, and family, and then you keep going. And page 842, it even begins sex in the middle class, and then it goes to youth culture, which would be you guys, okay? Teenagers, people in their 20s, like college age, you know, how's this changing? Of course, music and movies and cars and things of this nature are going to have a big impact. That's,
I know what this is. What
oh, those are the memorials for all the states. There's like all 50 states.
The World War II? No.
All right, so here's what I want you to do, okay? Take about 5 minutes And you can read anywhere from Women, Work, and Family on page 839 to the end on page 845, where it has a picture of Diana Ross. You guys know what you call these three women? Diana Ross is, of course, in the middle. She was sort of like the anchor of this group. What are they called? What are they called? The Supremes. Yep. So read all that over to them under the cultural dissenters.
Where do we start at?